it was just like it was in Sanford, Maine in 55. It was everyone drag racing, helping each other out. Your carb's broken, I got some jets in the truck, let's go fix it, you know? It was awesome. When I was in the left lane looking across at the girl dropping the flag with the chop and the Model A visor, I couldn't see anything. So I had a guy in the back who wanted to record the run, and I said, tell me when the flag drops, 'cause I can't see shit. So I won that race. I don't know how, but I did. Yeah. I'll take it. Nick Nicolai, he was passing a speed trap. He said he was going just about under 100. He raced home as fast as he could. He got into his garage, and
I think I've heard this.
He took the grill off, took the radiator off, jacked up the motor, turned on the radio, and started playing with the rear brakes. The cops pulled in, opened the door, and said, must not be this guy, and they left. And he had the radio cranked up because the engine was ticking from cooling down and making noise, so he got away with that one. But I mean, you got to know your car to take the engine out that quickly. At least get it up in the air, unbolted on a hoist.
Hey, welcome back to another episode of In the Driver's Seat with ABS. This is a new thing for us because we are in our museum where we've done podcasts before, but we have a live audience today. And this is, I know, a little nerve-wracking for Ben and I. But,
I'm really nervous.
but we're very excited to be here. And as Donald mentioned, we have a very special guest today, Mr. Brian Lenox. I know Ben and I met Brian a couple years ago. And it's cool to see, Ben and I are younger guys, and Donald mentioned that you're the founding member of the Tie Rod.
Correct.
So maybe you can drop the skincare routine, but it's cool to see a younger car guy involved in all this.
It's Brian Milanakis.
There we go.
Dude, when we met Brian, first of all, thanks so much for coming. I mean, you're like 60 miles away, so really appreciate you coming down. But when we, put together the Hot Rod show, we got connected with Trent from Speed and Culture, and Trent connected with Brian, who's a local guy. And not knowing much about hot rods before that show, it was very refreshing to meet Brian and really go through the motions with him, and understanding what's what, and understanding the history up and down, and really getting to the nitty-gritty of what are the best cars that we need and how do we get them. And Brian made it very simple for us. And I think a lot of people will watch this and say, well, what does this 20-year-old know about hot rods? But the reality is he's a real deal historian, and he's got a lot to add to the culture, which is really cool. So
I appreciate that.
We're happy to have you, sir. Happy to be here. How did you get into hot rods?
So it started pretty young for me. My dad had a 55 Ford pickup, and my earliest memory of a car is sitting on the floor in a car seat while my parents drove me around, and basically that was my introduction. My dad ended up selling it a few years later. My sister and I were growing up. He wanted to raise a family and kind of prioritize that, and then probably 10 years later he ended up with a 35 coupe, and he grew up in Concord, which is where the Tie Rods Club was founded. So he knew a lot of the old timers from growing up. Wasn't super involved, but as he got his 35 coupe and kind of got reintroduced to the hot rodding scene, he was eventually sponsored into the club, and then I kind of, followed him. Went to all the meetings with him, went to all the events with him, swap meets and everything, and kind of I was screwed after that.
Yeah, you were doomed.
Yeah, it's been a fun thing to do with my dad as well. It's been pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure.
I think Ben and I are not hot rodders. Maybe in a different way. When you put the big turbo on your 1 Series BMW,
that's not in the category. I don't think so. No.
But I mean, I think we have similar origins. Learning from our dads, and it's so special. I meet you through this job. You meet a lot of older guys out there, and they often say to me, "It's like, there are not younger guys involved in cars," it's a crazy statement. Which is totally not true, because there are a lot of young people involved in cars. And I think for us, and I've also heard from a lot of these guys, how important it is to cherish the times that you spend with your dad, whether it's building cars or going to the car show. And it's super cool that you started with that, and you still do that with your dad today. We're lucky to do that.
It's definitely rare, I think, but we take advantage of it for sure.
So we have a lot of hot rodders in the audience today, and guys that probably know more about it than we do. But with West Coast hot rodding and East Coast hot rodding, where did that kind of start? I know it kind of started in Southern California. When when was there the transition into East Coast hot rodding?
So El Muroc and El Mirage, the dry lakes, that's when a lot of the first, hot rods hit the road, and they were doing land speed racing. They weren't doing drag racing. But Hot Rod Magazine started covering all that was going on in Southern California, and everyone else in the country was basically viewing it through their magazine. And it was probably late 40s, early 50s where the publication started getting around the country, where different regions started picking up the trend and doing it themselves. A lot of these guys were coming back from the war and wanted that thrill. Drag racing gave it to them, and they learned some engineering while they were in the service as well, and they started modifying their cars when they got back. So Southern California, the Mecca, they had a whole year to do it. Everyone on the East Coast.
Yeah, we only have like 3 months.
We were cut short. Yeah. If you get good weather, you get 4 months, but it's interesting because what we were able to do with a shorter amount of time was pretty impressive. Yeah. And, 1955, the NHRA used Hot Rod Magazine to really start pushing people to start creating clubs and start organizing under the NHRA. Yeah. They taught them how to run races, promote them, and do them safely. Right. So in order to do that, they started the 1955 drag safari, where I believe it was Wally Parks went around to all the drag strips around the country. I think they made like 25 different stops, the last one being in Orange, Massachusetts. And when Wally wrote about that, when he got back, he had mentioned that, given the short time of the season, the New England region was the only part of the country that truly rivaled Southern California.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really crazy to think about because, like, today the culture is very similar. Like, kids in Southern California have their thing. There's kids everywhere who are modifying cars. But, like, we talked about stories of guys who would sit in an open garage, basically, with a tarp covering the opening and, like, a propane heater or whatever, like, heating the garage. And they would literally grind through 4 months to be able to have their car for the summer. And it's just like crazy how dedicated everyone became, like almost like so suddenly, right? Like people came back from the war and then a few years later they found out about this. And then like all of a sudden New England has like almost a mecca of like war or airports, I guess, that were, a lot of them kind of transitioned into drag strips, right? And we just had that kind of, we were able to, in New Englanders, were able to kind of transition into that, right?
Correct. We didn't have the space to do the land speed racing. We didn't have space for 4 mile tracks. And a lot of what they used were airstrips, not even airports. There was one where they first started racing in Beverly where they had to literally almost duke it out with the pilots to who was going to be able to use the strip that day. Yeah. And it came down to the pilots won because it was an airstrip, and one pilot who felt particularly bad about the fact that they couldn't race there anymore said, hey, drive up north to Maine, check out Sanford. It's a small airport. You might be able to get away with it up there. They went up there under the New England Timing Association in, I believe, late 50, early 51, and they started racing up there. They're welcomed with open arms. It's pretty cool. Yeah.
Did the racing kind of put a halt to the quote unquote gangs that existed? Did that kind of, it was kind of like, bootleggers and then eventually developed into NASCAR and stuff like that. Was that where it stopped, or?
Yeah, I mean, in New England, it was different because everyone in the Northeast was very conservative. In California, it was very, it wasn't quite the hippie era, but they were on their way there and they could get away with a lot more. And they didn't want any racing. Anything that was loud, quick was dangerous. And to get into the Tie Rods Club, you literally had to have a letter of recommendation from your local police chief. You had to have pictures of a car that was at least in progress, and then a recommendation from somebody in town. They wanted to make sure that you were legit.
Wow.
And Carol Sleeper, who was one of our first presidents, there was one event where some guys got cited for street racing. They weren't. They were already part of the Tie Rods at that point, which was a reformed group. Carol Sleeper took the 4 licenses, went down to the Lexington, Mass police station, handed them to the police officers and said, listen, I know they weren't racing. If you drop the charges, you can hold on to these for as long as you want until you see fit. He held them for 14 days, gave them back, and everyone was okay.
that would never happen to Ben and I.
No.
We live in
'cause you'd be
similar
in somebody
areas.
else's car without a license, just doing whatever you needed to do.
Yeah, I know. One of us would be driving each other to work, so
We do that already sometimes.
yeah, that would go well.
But yeah, I mean, the tie rods started off as the piston pushers, and they were rowdy. They were street racing. They were getting in trouble, and every Friday night the cops are out looking for them. You know, and some guys that wanted to stay doing that stayed with the piston pushers. The other guys moved off, and I believe it was March of '53 the tie rods officially organized.
Wow. So with you, jumping forward to today, and I mean, you spoke about it earlier with you got the passion from your dad, but you're 35, right?
Yeah.
I'm 26, Ben is 28.
28.
How does a young guy get into hot rods? Like, how come it didn't develop into Porsche or Ferrari or something that, more from your era?
I think it's what I was around, what I was exposed to. Growing up, I would go to breakfast with my dad every Sunday, and it turned out, I learned years later, it was basically like a hot rod therapy support group. All ex-hot rodders that used to race, telling me stories about the Bluebird Special and Eddie Hovajimian's record-winning Roadster. And I was young, but I was listening to it, and it wasn't until years later I realized it. But, growing up with all these old-time hot rodders kind of molded what I felt I wanted to be around for an automobile.
And it's so crazy because you think about car clubs today, and it's just kind of like a casual type of thing. And, there aren't really membership cards. There isn't like an initiation. There's no letter of recommendation for most of these casual car clubs. But, now the club's still around. You're the official historian of the club. We see you post a lot of great stuff on Instagram, all these stories and cool pictures and stuff. I mean, there must be so much documented stuff, not just from what you have, but from all these different clubs that have truly built a history and a foundation for really what car culture is in this country, because that's where car modifications really started, right? Like in
Absolutely.
the 50s with these clubs basically in New England and essentially in Southern California.
Yeah, the Schumann brothers wrote a book, I believe it was the early 90s, it came out, called Cool Cars, Square Roll Bars.
Yep.
I believe it was on display during the
was
hot
like
rod
our
exhibit
Bible.
here. It's my Bible.
It was literally
the
our
pages
Bible.
are torn because I
Oh,
go
yeah.
to it every day for something.
Yeah.
But, that book was basically everything that happened in New England. It covered every club, every region, almost every car. In the second edition, they even added more to it. And Paul Aldrich, who was our historian, who unexpectedly passed last October, he worked very closely with the Schumann brothers to put that book together. So what the Tie Rods Archives consists of is a lot of what went into that book. It's not just the Tie Rods Club, it's history of the entire region combined, which is pretty great to have.
And as you know, we went to Paul's house to pick up one of the cars for the exhibition, and walking in his house was like walking into a time machine. Like there was so much little knickknacks and plaques and license plates and magazine articles and pictures and signed stuff. When he passed, that wasn't too long ago, did you have to go into his house and essentially file through stuff?
We had to go through and find where all the archives were. His family knew that he was our historian and he held a lot of the Tie Rods property, so it was a daunting task to go in and file through it.
Oh,
and,
I can't imagine.
Did we get it all? I think, but you'll never know because you don't know where he filed things away and hid stuff.
I'm sure. That I could not imagine that.
But
task.
I hauled a few carloads out, and I mean, it had everything from early postcards from guys that went on trips, 8mm film, slides, all the meeting minutes for the Tie Rods dating back to 1952.
That's wild.
If you wanted to know in the July 58 meeting what they talked about, you open the book, it's all right there. Who paid their dues that day and who didn't.
I always think about Paul. I don't know if David's still here. I can't see him, but the first second we met Paul, we pull into his driveway. Out comes Paul with the Foreign Motors shirt. This is where Jay Leno used to work. Paul worked with Jay back in the day.
Jay worked at Foreign Motors?
Jay worked at Foreign Motors. Paul was telling stories about Jay, but we get in the driveway and we say, "Are you Paul?" "Yeah." He says, "How's it going?" Paul says, "Too early to tell." And I'm sure that was his line for 70 years, but I say that all the time, and I always think of Paul. And every time I say that, I just think of all the stuff he had throughout his house, and it was like an unorganized museum, basically, like a property room.
It's a true bachelor pad.
Yeah, it's bachelor pad.
Sure. He didn't have a wife, he didn't have kids, and I mean, his stairway had hollow motors, a blown Olds, a blown Chevy, a hollowed 32 flathead with all the correct parts down to the Detroit oiler, and they were just all on display.
Yeah,
it's incredible.
I think we hauled an engine out of his house, and that
was on display.
Oh, it was like, we get there, and most of these things, it's engine on a stand, and if you do it officially, it's got rollers and it's got stops and everything. And we get there, and Paul's like, here's David. We get the engine in the living room. We kind of had to kind of like jump it out of the living room and get it in the truck. Like, okay, this is kind of sketchy, but we'll make it work.
With a threaded rod going right up through the oil pan to keep it on a stand. It was incredible.
Yep. He had so many stories, man. I couldn't even imagine.
So with being this historian, I mean, you talked about the archive. Where do you keep all this stuff? Is it at your house? Is it under lock and key somewhere? I mean, because ultimately you want to pass that along to someone else.
So in my father and I's shop we have in my town where I live, I have a dedicated room that's kind of off to the side, separate from everything else. It's our personal stuff, all kind of locked away, organized. I've been scanning photos now for probably 3 months. I barely touched the surface, and I must have gone through 8,000 photos.
Whoa.
Yeah,
not all historical from the 50s.
Yeah.
It's spanned a number of years, but it's incredible just that it's all saved and documented.
Yeah.
So is the goal to digitize everything and eventually have it be available, or is it just to keep it safe in case something happens to it?
My goal is to share everything with the world. Paul did an incredible service to everyone in the region by saving it, acquiring it, tracking it down, writing things down so you know what is what. And he didn't use the internet. If he had a cell phone, he had it 2 days a week with him, maybe. And now my goal is to take what he did, finish the job, share it with the world, show people what New England hot rod history really is about.
And it's really so cool because they're just such like authentic pictures. Like, people aren't like, Paul, like whoever was photographing wasn't like, here guys, stand here and pose for this picture. And everyone's like, no, it's just, people were just taking photos while everything was in motion. And it was just so cool. I mean, you must have seen thousands of photos that are just like, holy shit, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. But it was just another moment in time.
And these guys were hot rodders, they weren't photographers.
Right.
So you're not going to get the greatest focus.
I
they
figured.
didn't quite
That's
know
almost
how to
better
use
though.
it.
Yeah.
It's more authentic that way, absolutely.
It absolutely is. What are some, so you've been kind of in charge, in this position now since Paul passed for almost a year. What's some like crazy stuff you've uncovered that you hadn't heard before, like from your dad or from the club or anything? Is there anything that's kind of came up that surprised you?
I had always heard about the cross-country trip with the purple sedan that we had here. We found video.
Yeah, you posted that. It was like a part 3 thing.
I had heard there was video, never knew if it actually existed.
Yeah.
As I'm going through everything, I found a CD with nothing on it.
Yeah.
And I had to go out and buy a CD-ROM because computers today don't have
nobody
them.
has it.
So I had to go buy a USB CD-ROM, put it in, and I just couldn't believe it. It was basically the guys packing up in Concord, getting ready, driving out to Indy, all footage of racing at the 61 Nationals, and then Fred continued on to California, and they documented the whole trip, and it blew my mind.
Yeah.
A little biased owning the car to have the video too, but it was pretty neat. I mean, there were, like I said, there was postcards from those guys on the trip that was all saved. You open up the meeting minutes, and it's 61 October. These guys were halfway across the country, and they're sending postcards back, and they're saved in that spot in the book.
Oh my God.
That's awesome.
We had wedding invitations for club members who got married, invited the whole club. We had the whole envelope with everything in it. It's unique. I haven't gone through everything too, so I'm sure there's going to be some more. It's
absolutely nuts.
finds.
And you talk about, you've mentioned a couple times like the 50s, or a year in the 50s. Was it really like the 50s were the prime time, or was like, I guess my question is, when did the real, jazz and real enthusiasm kind of start to maybe not fizzle, but maybe times changed?
So 57, 58 was an interesting point in time because the flatheads, which had always been the motor of choice for everybody, was slowly starting to fade away. Overheads were coming in, and people were starting to build more purpose-built dragsters.
Yeah.
So the New England Hot Rod Council ran the Sanford, Maine drags from 55 till 63. Mm-hmm. At that time, the New England Hot Rod Council disbanded because they needed a more legitimate, basically, they needed stands. They couldn't hold the spectators in Maine.
Right.
They were on an airstrip. There was no grandstands. They were lined up the whole airstrip just to be able to see.
Yep.
So what happened is there was 140 members in the New England Hot Rod Council. It was all different clubs and all their members. They cleared out the assets, paid out all the members from what they had, and almost every single one of those members took everything and invested it into what would eventually become New England Dragway, which opened later in '66. I would say that was probably the biggest time where things changed from, you know, driving up with your buddies,
right,
fixing the car while you got up there to make it run better, and then driving it home.
Yep.
Now it became teams, trailers, front end dragsters, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it got a lot more serious.
58 was also the one year where Sanford was running, Charlestown, Rhode Island was running. I believe it was Orange was also running. So they had, you know, every weekend. Sanford ran 2 weeks, and then I believe it was Orange was the first week, then Sanford, then Charlestown, then back to Sanford. So every weekend there was racing.
It's so crazy to think that there was a drag strip in Rhode Island. I feel like now it would just be so frowned upon.
People would hate it.
Well, and what's unfortunate is like all these other tracks, and you hear about this all around the country. It's happening right now in California, multiple tracks. You know, people have moved in right around it, and now the old drag strip is a park, and you walk in, and the entire thing is like asphalt. It's like a massive parking lot, and there's not really much else there. So it's one of those things that's kind of just been lost in time.
Well, it's you mentioned a story earlier. It's like today, you same thing with like Laguna Seca, and there are local tracks, Palmer Motorsports Park. You have to, I do a lot of motorcycle track days there, and you have to be careful of how loud the bikes are. But you told a story about how there was some cutouts in the bodywork of a car, and they got in trouble with the police. And it's the same thing today. You come into Newport and you'll see a big sign that says, no loud pipes. You'll get a citation for it.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, hot rodders had to deal with local police, state police, and registry cops. So the registry cops, I mean, these are the people that ran the inspection stations. They would go around and pull over hot rodders. They'd measure the headlights, measure the wheels, measure the overall height, measure the windshield.
Yep.
And so Fran Bannister, who had a channeled 39 coupe, he had the exhaust coming out right through the fenders, but he had cutouts. So a cop pulled him over, went through the whole car, looked it all over, couldn't find anything wrong. Finally, he looked at the cutouts and said, "What are those?" And he explained what they were, and he said, "Can you show me how they work?" So he pulled them out, fired the car up. "Here's your ticket for excessive noise."
That's crazy.
Baited him right into it.
There's a video that's been circulating of a guy with I think it's the Hyundai Elantra N.
Oh, I saw this. It's terrible.
Cop pulls him over and he says that he has a modified exhaust. And the guy's like, well, this is how it comes from the factory. And they're going back and forth. And ultimately, he gets a ticket for a modified exhaust when it's how it is from the factory.
Exactly, yeah.
Which is interesting to see how things are today with all the noise regulations and everything else.
Well, the difference is a Hyundai Elantra N could be absolutely confused with normal traffic where,
not a hot rod.
Almost any hot rod you see, it's an immediate, red flag. But it's the same thing, like different times. It's really funny.
So, I think that the textbook definition of a hot rod is a stock vehicle that's been modified to go faster than the original. If you look at today, would you consider if someone took like a Honda Civic and put a Tesla Model S Plaid motor in it, 1,000 horsepower, would you consider that a hot rod? I don't know if people in the crowd are probably
cringing, but I'm
sorry to the purists, but absolutely.
You would consider that a hot rod?
It's not a hot rod in the sense of when hot rodding, that term was coined, what that represented.
Yeah.
I personally think hot rodding represents what you're doing, not necessarily a specific vehicle. If you're taking something, especially something you can afford, you go to buy a 32 Ford these days, you're going to get a body and it's going to be $25,000. But if you can afford an older Honda, an older Subaru, and you want to put a new motor in it, that's hot rodding. Absolutely. You're modifying it, you're making it your own, you're making it faster than it came from the factory.
That's an interesting take. I don't know if I didn't like the intro to the question. I'm trying to just think of like a Honda Civic with a Tesla Plaid engine.
It would probably be incredibly difficult to make, and you'd probably be spending more money than just buying
the term that comes to mind,
super depreciated Tesla anyway.
You got to think of taking a Model A with a 4-cylinder motor, putting an Oldsmobile 303 in it. That's cutting edge technology and power. Replacing a 4-cylinder. So it's not too far off.
Yeah, it's really not.
Just about 80 years. That's
the term I think of is bastardized child.
Probably.
The Honda, it's like it just doesn't make me feel good. Where like hot rods, you look at them and it makes you happy. And I guess part of what makes you happy when you see a hot rod, or like makes you think about it, is the colors, which is part of why we're here, and the show. And it was interesting going through all the archives because a lot of the photos were black and white. So you're kind of picture this, if you will, type of thing. But, your coupe, a lot of the other cars in the show were so colorful. Do you think that's, part of the reason why people were so drawn to them is because of the looks, or were they really mostly fixated on, the mechanicals and the performance aspect of it? Or do you think it was more even for most of the guys?
I think it evolved over time. I think in the beginning, a lot of guys couldn't really afford paint. Yeah. A lot of stuff was just, rusty brown primer because that was at least stopping the rust from advancing. But, like you said, everything was in black and white in those older books and magazines. If you couldn't read a description of what color a car was, you didn't know. Yeah, there's a very famous hot rod from New England. It's a T-bucket. And when I was younger, I always saw these pictures of it and I thought it was white. Mm-hmm. It's turquoise. But you couldn't tell.
Yeah,
until
you have no
all of a
idea.
Sudden you find that one picture and you're like, oh my God, that thing is
completely
not
different
white.
car. Yeah.
And Fred being a loud person even back in the 50s, he wanted his cars to be seen. So he painted them that purple, which is a mix of 55 DeSoto and 54 Ford.
Yeah. Was Fred kind of the catalyst for a lot of what was going on? Maybe in the club or maybe in New England. I mean, he was out there in a way.
Yeah, I mean, you could go as far as saying he was kind of like one of the founding fathers of hot rodding. He wasn't necessarily into racing, but the show circuit, he ruled it. His 32 was the top, and anyone in New England would probably agree with that.
Now, and how did he kind of get to that position? How much experience, mechanical experience did he have, if you know? And how did he get kind of to that point where he's in the magazines, he's doing this cross-country trip, people know him everywhere? Was that kind of an all of a sudden thing? Or did he kind of know the right people and kind of make his way to the kind of the top of it?
He was a wheeler dealer and a great self-promoter. Mm-hmm. So, a lot of the times with these East Coast guys, they had to submit their cars and their own stories to magazines. Mm-hmm. In the 50s, Hot Rod Magazine wasn't coming out to the East Coast. That wasn't cheap to travel. So you had to depend on your own correspondence going back and forth to get your coverage. And that's what Fred did, is he took pictures, wrote stories, sent them to whoever would take it, and eventually got into a couple magazines. Mm-hmm. But Fred was probably the loudest of the group. When you're the loudest, people hear you and they listen to you. And he ended up being the Tie Rods Club president for, I believe, 29 years in a row.
Mm-hmm. And I don't think a lot of people make this connection, but every time I'm in a discussion, whether it's in a museum or with a guy at Cars and Coffee about hot rods, I always try to tie it back into they're doing basically the same thing that my friends and I are doing today. Literally this weekend, we're going to be hanging out in the garage, messing with my friend's BMW. Same thing.
You put some slick back through your hair.
Yeah, we're going to chop the roof this weekend, actually.
Newport's up in the white collar.
Oh, 100%. We don't all have white t-shirts and jeans, but it's the same idea. But did these guys Fred and Bannister, did they understand the significance of what they were getting into? Or were they just kind of farting around, making their cars fast and sending their pictures into magazines and seeing what happened?
I think some of them were in it for the fun. Some of them were in it for the fame. Yeah. Fred definitely knew that his car was the top car, and he kept it for a number of years. I believe he sold it in 2007.
And you mean the coupe?
The Roadster.
The Roadster, yeah.
The Roadster that was right here.
Right,
The sedan that was over there, he kept until his passing in 2014.
Okay, wow.
So the Bannisters were like engineers. They built race cars to squeeze every last bit of horsepower out of that engine. And
real quick, if anyone here isn't familiar with Bannister's Roadster, I would highly suggest you check it out. It's been in not just our museum, but a couple others. It's been featured everywhere. I believe it has independent front and rear suspension. Am I wrong?
I think that's the Fitzgerald Roadster.
Okay.
The blue one does.
Yes.
But the nice thing about the Bannister Roadster is it's got a 38 truck grille, which is pretty unique. It's got a big, I believe it's a 304 cubic inch flathead. And Fran Bannister drove that with his 2-year-old son in between him and his wife all the way to Bonneville in 1950. He had his friend follow in a 40 sedan with the race motor in the back. So they got out to the salt, swapped motors, and I think he went about $125 maybe. It was it was cooking for them with a flathead.
Yeah, 100%. So how did when did you acquire the sedan? If the crowd doesn't know that you
the sedan we acquired, I believe it was early 2021. So what happened is after Fred passed, his family sold it locally. It lasted here for about 2 weeks and then ended up in California, where unfortunately a lot of hot rods do. Stayed in California for a little over a year, was traded back to Connecticut. Guy in Connecticut had it for about 4 years before calling me and said, hey, I know you own Fred's Yellow Mercury. I traded a Corvette to get this car back because I wanted it on the East Coast. I'm going to offer it to you. And obviously, as everybody knows, when a car comes available and someone offers it to you, you're never in the position to buy it.
You kind of have to sell the house and get to accept it.
You got to do it. And so we did it, and it's been a blast. You know, not long after we got it, we brought it down here, met you guys, and we've had a lot of fun with that car.
And we ruined your life.
Yeah. No, definitely not. We were drag racing it back in Maine.
You did that recently, yeah.
Memorial Day weekend. Great event, Northeast Vintage Drags, Oxford Plains Speedway. It was just a weekend of it was just like it was in Sanford, Maine in 55. It was everyone drag racing, helping each other out. Your carb's broken, I got some jets in the truck, let's go fix it. You know, it was awesome.
Yeah.
And you said that the visibility during the drag racing wasn't the best, so you had to have a spotter buddy in the back.
When I was in the left lane looking across at the girl dropping the flag with the chop and the Model A visor, I couldn't see anything. So I had a guy in the back who wanted to record the run, and I said, tell me when the flag drops, 'cause I can't see shit. So I won that race. I don't know how, but I did. Yeah. I'll take it.
Just close your eyes and
I retired after that one.
Put the right pedal down.
Yep. No, it worked out. It was fun.
And I, you know, it's cool to see, I mean, given the social media world that we're in, and I've mentioned this on a couple episodes before, you see some people in the car community who they'll post stuff and it's just, you know, they just want to post a picture with a Lamborghini and they're there for the flexing. But it seems like with you, and it's obviously evident that you're so passionate about this stuff and you're there to share it. And you've had a couple viral videos, which is cool that it's not just a new supercar, it's a hot rod that's going viral. Exactly.
It's kind of nice to see when, you know, 1.2 million people see your hot rod driving around, and I just think that's more people exposed to the culture and the community and the passion.
And it's really crazy because there aren't many people, like modern enthusiasts, that think about hot rodding like on a daily basis, and then they see something like that and they're shocked. But you mentioned a few minutes ago, if you wanted to get into this authentically, as they were doing in the 50s, it would cost you thousands of dollars. Like these guys were doing this, like pulling cars at a junkyard for like less than $100.
One of the guys in the club told me he never paid more than $600 for one of his vehicles, and he's got, I think, 4 or 5 32 Fords.
And times are changing, and even we mentioned Civics earlier. Like even the best Civics are like ridiculously expensive.
Oh, a Honda Civic Type R is like out the door. It's like $50,000.
I mean, I was even just looking. There's a 2000 Civic Si, which are really fun. When I was in high school, I wanted one. They were like $6,000 or $7,000, and I didn't have that. And the same car now, they want $25,000 to $30,000. It's like, it's outrageous. Like, do you think in general, maybe not just hot rodding, do you think cars are becoming too expensive and it's almost pushing the hobby out? Like it's tough because everything, BMWs, Porsches, everything is just getting out of reach now. It's kind of outrageous whether you want to modify something or just build it and keep it original.
I think it definitely is, especially for younger guys getting into traditional hot rodding. We've got a great group of guys out here that are doing it, and you know, part of what you're doing, if you're a metal worker and you can do a lot of that work yourself, that takes a lot of the cost out of it. But you know, still buying an old body, an old drivetrain is going to cost a lot of money. And you know, I think that's a major reason you don't see a ton of younger people, our generation, into traditional hot rodding and stuff like that.
Now, let's say someone does want to get into this. Where do you go to find a body or a car or an engine? Do you start in New England? Is there some sort of classifieds like hot rod Craigslist where you can just go to like Southern California and click your location and find stuff like this? Or because I imagine at this point it's
Facebook
hard
Marketplace, baby.
Yeah, dude,
I keep searching. Facebook Marketplace and Instagram, you know, people personally posting things. There's a couple accounts that are strictly there for, you know, swapping parts or cars, and you know, it's tough. There's a lot of scammers out there too, and you got to be really careful.
100%.
Obviously, you know, it's that older generation that fall for everything, not us, but there's
Don't speak so soon. I've been scammed for a fender, $500, lost it, gone, bye. But like, do people hunt for cars in Southern California, or is it really everywhere?
I mean, California, if you find a body, not going to have rust.
Yeah, right.
You know, like the Bannister Roadster, by the time Larry Hook got that car, it had been sitting on its side, on the side of a garage for 20 years, and he basically had to rebuild the entire passenger side of that car. Yeah. Completely rotted out. And that's the problem, the salt and the snow, and it's not kind to cars up here.
Yeah, it'll just absolutely eat it, like, very quickly. Would these guys drive, like, year-round, or was it just kind of like...
A lot of
it was
them
a
did.
summer hobby.
Fred used his purple sedan. He used that year-round, and he actually had a 39 four-door sedan, and he would take the 4-carb flathead out of the Roadster that was here, and he would put that in the 39, and he'd drive that around all winter.
Casual engine swap.
Oh, it's amazing, dude. You would take you the whole winter to do that.
Bro,
you wouldn't get to work.
I'd still be doing it.
Oh, I know, 100%.
Oh, these guys are doing it on a Tuesday for fun.
Oh, I know, literally. Like, that's the thing. Like, this was their thing. Like, they went to work, they ate dinner, cars. Like, that was
100%.
it. There's nothing else.
There was one guy, Eddie Hovajimian, he's one of the earliest members of the club, and he had a 32 Roadster with a Merc flathead. The flathead came out of his mentor's wife's car.
Did she know it came out?
She knew.
Okay.
Every Friday night, they'd take it out.
Oh,
they'd
no
go
way.
racing all weekend.
No way.
Sunday night, they'd be up till the wee hours of the morning so Mrs. Nickerson could get to work.
Oh, my God.
That's crazy.
Eventually, when they upgraded her car, they kept the motor out. And Linden, New Jersey, 1954, was the first ever East Coast NHRA sanctioned race.
Yeah.
Eddie Hovajimian, with that Merc motor, drove his Roadster all the way down. I believe there was 106 cars that showed up, most of them on trailers. He won top speed overall, took the trophy, and drove home, 18 years old.
And gave it to his mom.
Yeah, I hope so.
Crazy.
Probably, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, kept it in the back seat with his seatbelt on. Oh, my God.
But that didn't get a lot of coverage because no one on the West Coast wanted to acknowledge an East Coast guy won.
Yeah, right.
It's pretty sad.
Yeah. I mean, go ahead.
No, I was just... Was that due to the magazine coverage being like...
I think a little bit of it was... It was tough to cover. And
Yeah.
I think, there were some big name guys from the West that were out there racing that didn't win.
Wow.
And I think
that's very like Enzo Ferrari of them. Wow,
Don
that's
Garlitz
wild.
used to go up to Sanford, Maine, and some guy beat him, and he pulled him over and said, "Hey, I don't lose when I come here." And he said, "You shouldn't come here anymore then."
That's, wow. It's like bullying to a
Yeah.
textbook.
Well, so was there... With this... So this is like a whole other thing. Like, so this created a serious beef. Like, there was actually like it wasn't just like, oh, you've got West Coast over there, East Coast over
That's
here.
how Biggie and Tupac started.
Yes.
Right, hot rodding.
Yeah, hot rodding.
Yeah, right. Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Anyways, so it wasn't just like two different genres. Like, they literally had like rivalries, and they were going head to head.
Yeah, and a lot of the guys from the tie rods actually moved to LA in the early 60s.
Okay.
I think there was 5 of them that lived in Pasadena. Some worked for big people, Eddie Meyer, Mickey Thompson, Vic Edelbrock, and Fred ended up joining the LA Roadsters. Mm-hmm. So he wanted to join as an associate member, which is something they didn't have and they didn't want to do. Mm-hmm. And I think it was like, hey, this guy's from the East Coast. We don't need him part of the LA club.
Yeah, right.
Well, the president was out of town, and Fred convinced them to vote in associate members. He got himself in. The president came back for the next meeting and was pissed. Fred moved back home to Massachusetts and lived the rest of his life as an associate member of the LA Roadsters.
Oh my God.
This guy was crazy.
This is like the epitome of Fred, dude.
He worked it for himself.
He was a schemer, dude. He was a schemer. Oh my God. What were some of the Fredisms that kind of stand out to you? Like, just like in general.
I mean, he was pretty wild. He was known for writing things not only in visible places on his cars, but non-visible. If you get underneath his Roadster, he's got a chrome Columbia axle. And I laid down when it was over here, and you can read under the gas tank, "You nosy prick." And I had heard that years ago. A guy that grew up across the street from him told me when he was 11 or 12, Fred would let him come over and wash the car, and he'd say, "Don't forget to polish that rear axle," and you get under that, and he's like, "Ooh, yikes, this guy doesn't want me here." But, Fred was known for pulling a lot of pranks as well. So one thing they did is, I believe it was summer of '56, they spent the whole summer collecting detour signs. And back in the day, instead of having like reflectable lights, they had actual like smudge pots. Mm-hmm. They would light a little, like a torch basically, and put it on the side of the road. They collected enough where they eventually rerouted traffic one night off of the highway onto a dead end dirt road in the middle of Concord where no one would know how to get out of. And they just sat there, had beers, and watched the cars drive off into the abyss.
The menace.
And they planned that out too. That was the crazy part. They spent the whole summer planning that trip.
Oh my God. So they had some free time. They would just work on the engines and be like, okay, where are we sending these cars? That's amazing.
Another good story is, I don't believe it was Fred, but I think it was the first president, Nick Nicolai. He was passing a speed trap. He said he was going just about under 100. He raced home as fast as he could. He got into his garage and he took the grill off, took the radiator off, jacked up the motor, turned on the radio, and started playing with the rear brakes. The cops pulled in, opened the door, and said, must not be this guy, and they left. And he had the radio cranked up because the engine was ticking from cooling down and making noise, so he got away with that one. But I mean, you got to know your car to take the engine out that quickly. At least get it up in the air, unbolted on a hoist. Pretty impressive what they did to avoid the law.
The level of creativity, like, I wish we could have any of them here to just tell stories, dude. It's like, it would just never end.
It's crazy.
It would just never end, dude. It would.
Today it'd be like, oh, I was playing video games and that's all you get.
Fell asleep on my couch.
Yeah, that's all you get.
That's about it.
It's so wild to hear like all those stories. It's like you hear stories from like, my dad and like my grandfather, and like all these guys just seem so cool. And it's like now it's like you don't hear that. Maybe you'd see it on somebody's Snapchat or whatever.
I will never be as cool as those guys were back then.
No.
Never.
Maybe we can try.
You could get close. You got the hair though. Like your hair's getting there.
Yeah, you got the lettuce.
You got
going.
like a little flow.
That's what happens when your barber moves out of town.
Really? Oh, I've been there. That sucks.
Can't go get another barber.
I know. I had to do the supercuts thing for a little while. No offense, supercuts.
I could
if you're
tell.
watching. Yeah. It doesn't work out well. Listen, they're great people. But when you need a barber, it's a tough situation.
What's like your plan for the future? Like obviously you're the historian. You're the steward of a couple of these cars. Where do you want to take this in the next 20, 30 years?
I mean, my goal is to just keep the history living, keep the memory of these guys and their cars and what they did alive. It's sad to know that so many people don't know what happened in their own backyard. But my goal is to kind of track down, acquire, and save historically significant vehicles to the area. We've got a couple, and there's a couple that I've got in my sights that I'm trying to.
Can you talk about those?
I cannot right now.
You don't want to give them away. Yeah,
These
all these guys will be fishing for it.
But there's a few out there, and it's amazing how many still have survived. Especially that all ran in the same circle of all the cars that were here for that exhibit.
Do you know of any that are like completely dilapidated and like need to be saved?
That's a big word.
I don't even know if I said it right.
There's, ironically enough, there was a Facebook Marketplace listing today, 32 Ford, running chassis, running gear, everything. And it's the same frame from a car I just posted a picture of.
Whoa.
A week ago. There's a guy named Norm Kitching. He had a 32 Roadster, Cadillac red. It was a street car and a show car. And over about a 3 to 4 year period, he kept modifying it a little bit more as a dragster every time until eventually the engine compartment was where the seat is. He removed the trunk lid and that's where he sat. Basically in the trunk, making it like a slingshot dragster with 32 body on it.
Yeah, the level of modifications that happened back in the day, considering a lot of these guys were doing it in their own house, is outrageous. Like, we're plugging, ECU tunes in and like sending it to the mechanic to figure the shit out. They were literally chopping
a torch and a cold chisel, and they're chopping the whole floor
cutting
out of
the
car.
body. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing, like the level of stuff they were doing. And the stuff not only survives, but shows really well most of the time, if it wasn't just a dedicated go-fast car.
Well, I think, especially with the older stuff, your creativity could flow more because you didn't have to deal with modern-day regulations. Whereas, like, if you're modifying a modern car and you want to get it registered and insured and all that, you're kind of limited on
emissions.
Yeah, exactly. You're limited on what you can do. Whereas, like, the sky was the limit with your creativity.
Yep. And especially if they were doing it for the drag strip, they didn't need to worry about the roads and the rules of registry cops and all that kind of stuff.
That's so crazy, registry cops.
I mean, 3 different governing bodies trying to hunt you down, so.
That's why you got to be fast.
That's why they chose drag strips outside of Massachusetts. Mm-hmm. They didn't want to be in Mass. And when the New England Hot Rod Council joined were formed.
Were there more registry cops in Massachusetts, or?
I believe the registry cop thing was just Massachusetts.
Oh, it was just a Massachusetts thing.
And
Okay.
Mass was extra super conservative about hot rods. They didn't want modified vehicles. And Maine, they were like, sure, bring them up. Why not?
That's crazy.
Was Rhode Island kind of the same way with Charlestown?
It was a shorter lifespan at Charlestown. I think it was about 3 years. They raced kind of heavily up there, but I think it was out of the way. They weren't doing it in the middle of the street, so they kind of let it happen. And then I believe once New England Dragway started open, that's when everyone pulled away from the airstrips and started going where they could accommodate the crowds and all the pits for everybody. And they had better timing situations, better track, everything was good.
Yeah. So let's say we gave you a blank slate and $100,000 or however much you need. $355,675. What are you building?
It's a great question. I think the obvious answer for any hot rodder would be a 32 Roadster, but no, I would.
With a Tesla motor.
Yeah.
Dude, can you stop? I'll walk this off the set right now.
I would probably want a 39 Deluxe Coupe. Big flathead, Columbia rear. I love flatheads. I know the overhead engines are going to get you more power and get you down the road, but if you got a 2-speed rear end, you're good to go.
Yeah.
You got overdrive, you can cruise.
It really is. I mean, all this, period equipment is still so sought after, and in what situation would you choose? Maybe not modern equipment, but newer stuff. Like, and would it be a transmission? Would it be axles, tires? Like, what would you go newer with?
Transmission and axle, personally. I have a 40 pickup, chopped 40 pickup with a flathead. It's got a T5 5-speed transmission with a 9-inch rear. Perfect setup. It's not super traditional, but you can't really see what's there, and it's a joy to drive. And that's what I would do personally. I don't like modern engines.
Are a lot of guys using Tremix in like 32 Fords?
Older guys that kind of got caught up in the street rotting phase of like the 80s and 90s. They all have disc brakes and power windows and AC too.
Yeah, for sure. And like the LED lights that come out of the fender somehow. We have one of those. But it's just interesting that with a blank slate you would go the authentic route, and it's just really cool. Now, is a lot of that money tied up in just finding the stuff? And you have to spend that big money on the stuff that people were pulling out of fucking junkyards. Yeah, I mean, like if you want a Columbia rear end, it's going to cost you a fortune now. Yeah. Especially if it's functioning. Yeah. And if it's not, you got to get that thing to work. There's a lot of moving parts in there. And is this something that a lot of people can, do you think, work on? Like a lot of these parts, or is it a dying breed like a lot of other aspects of vintage cars now? I mean, I think it always comes down to somebody's skill level, but a flathead motor is a fairly simple. Yeah, flatheads are. Yeah. A lot of these were gas, oil, and water, and a battery, and some didn't even have battery. Had a magneto and jump start or push start. It's a weird time. It's a weird time. We're getting into the future, which I don't know if I like. I don't know. You're like buying a Tesla, so I'm not buying a Tesla. You keep talking about it. I'm just trying to rile people up. Well, I'm riled up. I know you're riled up. Jacked up. You should have seen Steve before. He was like ready to punch me across the office when I said that I would ask that question. Yeah, well. But, I think that every generation is worried that the thing that they love is going to go away. But it seems that as time goes on, these things still continue because, here's Brian, who loves these cars and is keeping these cars alive, like these guys in the crowd. Like, you talk about electric cars and all that, like, that's a whole nother subtopic, but I don't think that these enthusiast cars are going away. Yeah, and I always think about, when I was in here, it was probably like 6 years ago now, and I met this older couple, they're probably in their 60s, and they were like, kids aren't into cars anymore, like at all. And I think to them, they're thinking hot rods, muscle cars, whatever. And I'm like, no, like all of my friends are car people, but the difference is, I'm not in my garage all Tuesday night trying to figure something out.
You're on Tinder, bro.
Yeah, I'm on Tinder where I'm 6'5", but like we just like it's true, I'm 6'5" on Tinder. We just like plug a cord into our BMWs and make them faster. It's like a different world. But like where I like connecting this with what we do with YouTube and algorithms and Instagram, like my hope is that like what goes around comes around, and I hope that you continue to post stuff and stuff continues to be seen by the masses, and there's a group, if a video gets 2 million views, there's a group of 8,000 people that say, holy shit, this is fucking cool. And I know a guy down the street who's got something like this, and my dad's been telling me to get off the fucking computer. So maybe this is what I want to do with my life. And like I could see that completely happening, and kids showing up to car shows with hot rods and muscle cars and stuff.
Not to cut you off, but it's
no, you cut me off.
I did. Prick.
Go ahead.
But it's like you look at like Gen Z, and Gen Z is like starting to emulate styles from the 80s and
from the way back, from the 90s.
From the way back.
Yeah.
But it's like
from the last millennium.
Like something that might have gone out of style is now coming back into
100%.
style.
100%.
And, I mean, we see it all the time. Kids will come in here and they've never seen whatever it is, and you can see like the passion in their eyes, and it's like that you just ignited a spark in that kid.
Well, and what's crazy with a kid who's like 3, 4, 5, 6, if they walked in and all these cars were in primer, it wouldn't be the same like, oh, like look how cool that car is, But once you paint it like DeSoto purple and all these crazy colors, like people just start to really like open their minds and think, holy shit, this really is cool, when they have no idea what else is going on under the hood or underneath the body of the car. And that's really what I think, is going to help in the future. It's like all the colors and how, special these cars looked, right?
Yeah, and obviously color now is a big deal. If you get a Porsche in a rare spec color, that's good.
It's all the rage.
It's all the
Paint
rage.
to sample.
Yeah, even though it's the same car as a black one. It's really unbelievable what colors are doing today. I mean, these Porsche programs are $45,000 to pick a special paint color. And people are like, sign me up, and the wait list is full, and you just can't get one. It's a 4-year wait time. But I mean, that's where I hope this goes, and I think it'll continue with such a great backlog of authentic stuff. Where in a world where people are just consuming BS all day, and you've got all these real things that happen. Like look at the good times. You know.
And when it comes down to it, I was born in '89. I'm new to this.
Yeah.
When I'm researching stuff, talking to people, they're like, "Oh yeah, we know, we were there." And I'm like, "I wasn't." Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah. We gotta
you gotta
what's
get it
great
out.
is like even cars in here, like, maybe that Mustang to you is like, all right, I've seen that Mustang 100 times. It's going to be the first time somebody sees it, and they get to get excited about it and have that same excitement and carry that through and talk to their friends about, oh, you wouldn't believe this Mustang I saw at the museum. And that's what I like about these pictures and the history is I get to, show it to people who may have never had a chance to see it or live it back in the day.
Well, and that's the best part. I mean, Antonio and I have spent hours, in the museum talking to people, and that's what's so cool is that you've got people like a lot of you guys, I'm sure, who come in and know more than what we know, and we can say, okay, please educate us so I can pass that info on to the next person who asks, and I know. But that's what's cool about museums, and that brings me to the thought of like, what about a hot rod museum? Like, how is that going to happen? Like, how can we make that happen?
I mean,
because
Peterson's kind of there. Peterson's very hot rod centric.
Yeah,
especially
but that's
Bruce
West
Meyer.
Coast. Come on, East Coast, bro. Continue the rivalry.
Yeah, keep them out there.
I mean, another exhibit here wouldn't hurt.
Yeah,
I think it'd be pretty good. I'd love to see an exhibit that focuses, not to exclude a 32 Ford, but when you think hot rod, it's easy to say 32 Ford.
Yeah.
But like, let's see those Model T Roadsters. Let's see the T buckets. Let's see the sedans and the 40s and the 39s.
It was I was over hearing David earlier, and someone asked, well, when was that show? I was like, oh, that was fall of 2021, and I just realized that was 3 years ago.
Yeah, 3 years ago.
Holy shit, dude.
And we had a bunch of hot rods at the gathering that year too, and
that was so
that
cool.
was awesome. We had a great weather.
It was so cool, putting that event together because I explained to you how much of a high-end event that is. It's a massive ticket. There's a lot you get out of the event. It's 6 hours, free food, free drink all day, car unveilings, DJ. It's like a really fun place to be. And all these guys are just hot rodders, right? They're not like flair. There's no crazy, like, take a picture of me with this thing type of thing. They're just there enjoying the day. And I remember running around all day and seeing them, and they were kind of like, holy shit, dude, what the fuck is this event? So to have them included in such a cool, environment was really neat. And you're coming back, and you're involved in the Concours this year, right? Or were you?
I'll be down here.
Yeah.
I don't have a car in it, but I'll be down here for sure.
Good. Well, we're trying to get you into be a judge. So we're still working on that. Right. We're getting there probably in the next couple of years, but it's fun to keep Brian around because we relate to him.
I mean, what's better than Newport?
Oh, I know.
It's awesome.
Concord, Mass.
It's all right. Getting a little political.
It's right on the water, Concord, Mass.
Yeah.
It's right on the ocean.
Yep. Right on the river.
What else you got?
Dude, that's, I don't know.
Did we ask him every question?
Yeah, you can't look at my list. Yeah, you can look at it.
Okay.
I think we asked you every question. I mean,
I see Subaru WRX on here. Okay, we're done,
bro. we already focused on.
Was
that,
it?
so.
You substituted Honda. Yeah. Okay.
Anybody have any questions from the audience? We have a mic if you guys want to ask.
You have to hold the whole tripod though.
Yeah.
And walk with it.
If I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I just met Brian for the first time tonight. Ironically, I went to high school with his father. He graduated a year ahead of me. My father was one of the original members of the Tie Rods Club of Concord. Unfortunately, now I regret what we did, but at the time it was the right thing to do. We sold his original hot rod. I'm kind of on a quest to find that, and that's why I kind of connected with Brian. I've narrowed it down to a few places, but I guess what I really wanted to say is when you were telling some of the stories, how about Jack Crosby?
Oh, Jack.
Hanging around at the bottom of Crosby's corner, all these guys in the 50s and 60s hanging around. Carol Sleeper, too, keep in mind, was handicapped.
Correct.
So
Carol Sleeper, one of the first Tie Rods presidents, he was a stock car racer, and he was injured in a race where his friend, I believe it was in North Carolina, his friend crashed, and he stopped his car, got out of his car to help his friend, and he got struck by another car. He ended up spending the rest of his life in a wheelchair.
And I don't want to monopolize the mic, but, they say the World War II veterans, and they are the greatest generation. There's this breed of hot rodders, like my dad's age. They're outliving. They've lived out their lives, and I applaud you, Brian, for trying to keep that alive. I think you're doing a tremendous service, and maybe I can find something to do and work with you on that.
Absolutely, I appreciate that. Thank you.
That's a crazy story. Stopped and got hit by a car
the saddest part is that wasn't how he got paralyzed. He was in the Marines at the time, and they wanted to do a new surgery to try and fix something that went wrong with his back, and never walked after the surgery.
Oh wow. Jeez. Holy shit.
But he had a Lincoln, 54 Lincoln, that he would drive around. He had hand controls. Mm-hmm. And Carol Sleeper was an engine whisperer. He built the most winningest flathead motor in New England. He had a 32 four-door sedan. Nobody could beat him. He did about 125 and a quarter mile. Four-door, full-fendered sedan, while everyone else was stripping everything else off they could get for extra weight. And he was undefeated for, I think, 2 years in a row in Sanford, Maine.
Do you know what kind of added into that success mechanically? Do you have any, inkling?
There's simple things that these guys said they did, before they put the valves in, they'd rub them with toothpaste because it's a mild abrasive and it would just make it a little bit smoother. Mm-hmm. It did little things like that. But the amazing thing about Carol Sleeper's race car is he had a different driver every single time it went down the strip. Huh. And for the car to be that consistently good, it didn't matter who was driving it. Yeah. I mean, basically, he was almost like a stepdad to all these tie rods guys, because he was, like Paul said, he was World War II era, where the majority of the guys in the club were Korean War era. Yeah. And so he'd build the motor and say, you guys race it. And, we got great pictures of him in the wheelchair at the drag strip, right next to the car and everything.
It's awesome.
It's pretty cool.
Totally nuts.
And
this guy's got a question.
I was trying to think of the guy who did all those great sweatshirts in the West Coast with the spray.
Ed Roth.
Ed Roth. Okay,
Yep.
Thanks. I couldn't think of it. I'm Doug Fisher. Grew up in Pittsburgh, moved to Rhode Island, been here quite a while. And now hot rodding. Can we say that hot rodding is an American thing? I know it's almost like
That's
a
a good
form of
question.
behavior. It's
I would say it originated as an American thing, but right now there are clubs in, I believe it's, in England they do the Pendine sand races where they race on a beach just like the Race of Gentlemen that's done here in New Jersey.
Yeah, right.
They have races, I believe, in...
So anytime you invent a car or a machine, somebody wants to race it.
Correct.
And that sort of evolves into hot rodding.
We're talking these guys importing American hot rods, 32 Fords and everything over there.
But the whole notion almost seems like, kind of U.S. in a way.
I would say that they're cosplaying as American hot rodders, but...
Yeah.
But,
it's big in Japan too. You see all these guys with hot rods,
my big question is, you've been talking a little bit about 32 Fords, and also this is a good place to kind of network. I just purchased a 32 Ford Sprint car.
Nice.
Come up and see me later if you know any machine shops in the area, and so looking for knowledge.
Well, you're in the right place, and I think you just asked a good group of people.
You might have someone tapping on your shoulder in a minute.
Do people approach you with questions like that? Like when they meet you, like, hey, I'm looking for a car, or hey, I'm building this car, I need some assistance, or some, I need some networking help to get you the right group of people?
Absolutely. Especially since becoming the tie rods historian, people kind of use me as a gateway to talk to some of those old guys and get information. And hey, I have this car, and maybe you have some pictures because I know it was in Sanford in '56, and I've had a lot of people reach out to me that way, and I've found stuff for people, which has been pretty exciting.
That is really cool. You hunt for a lot of stuff, huh?
Yeah.
How many hours a day do you spend on Facebook?
What's the time
Marketplace?
commitment?
I think my wife might watch this sometime, so I'm going to say 20 minutes.
Of Facebook Marketplace?
Yeah,
me too.
Okay, if she wasn't
my mom watches
watching.
this too.
God. Like after she goes to bed and I just sit there and just kind of like go through everything, hours.
At least you don't have like a girlfriend on the side,
No.
Dude, it's so bad
I don't have
because
time
you get
digging
to the end
into
of Facebook and you close it, you reset it, you go back to Facebook, refresh the page. It's like, oh, look, there's something new.
Didn't see that one an hour ago.
You got paperwork for that thing, bud? I'm not a buyer. I just want to know.
Well, also the algorithm is so good too that it just like it knows what you've searched
100%.
for, and then it just feeds you more stuff.
Yeah.
It's so addicting.
Yeah, and then you get really insulted when it's just sending you Miatas, and it's like, please, just let's get a mix of stuff, not just different Miatas. It's so bad. But it's funny. There must be a lot on there too. I mean, like all kinds of just stuff that people just say, I don't have room for it anymore.
Yeah, I mean, some of the older stuff, it can be sad because people don't know what it is.
Right, yeah.
I've been called to clear out garages where, I bought a Model A and a Model T out of this lady's garage. And for the price, she'd take anything you want because I don't know what any of it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I had 6 Model A engines and, Babbitt bearing pieces, like stuff that nobody knows enough about that would end up in a landfill somewhere.
Yeah. We hear about that a lot. I mean, in the industry, guys like Evan Hyde and guys he works with, I mean, he's going to have estate sales that are just endless. I mean, Paul, I think about Paul, he was borderline hoarder. It wasn't like
Borderline is kind.
It wasn't like, yeah, but it wasn't like you walked in the house, you watch some of these horror reality TV shows and it's like, okay, where do I put my first step into the house? It's like, where do I walk? Like his stuff was like not
Organized.
overwhelming.
It was an organized chaos.
Yeah, it wasn't. Organized wasn't the word, but it wasn't overbearing.
Yeah.
Where it was like, holy shit, like I can't even get in this house. But his stuff just sitting like in his living room was like.
So you must have not went into the magazine room then.
No, we weren't like prying around, but he invited us in the living room. We sat down, and that's where he had the engine sitting. Yep. And it's just like you kind of like look around, and I'm thinking to myself without knowing, like this stuff is hugely important, and it's kind of just piled on his desk and on the shelving and on the coffee table.
And he probably knew where everything was.
I'm sure he did. I'm sure he
was.
I
went over to look for
bucking on
something
it.
one day, and he pulled out a stack and went to the side and said, "Here you go."
Well, and that's what was so crazy about Paul, because David and I putting together the show, we, not knowing Paul, we call him, send him the loan agreement, email it to him, call him again, no answer, call him again, no answer, and it's like, we're kind of concerned. And then I think it was probably you who said, yeah, he doesn't really use a phone, so you're gonna have to go there. And we had him sign the loan agreement on site, and we're like, okay, this guy's completely like disoriented until you realize he's got an absolute photographic memory, telling us stories of stuff and stories about the car, and just pointing out stuff in his room that he maybe not have laid eyes on in a while, and it was like amazing. Was he kind of, I know we're kind of still going on here, but he's an important figure to me in like the whole show and obviously the history of the club. Like, were there more guys like Paul who kept stuff, or were most guys just living in the moment, do you think?
There still are guys like Paul.
Yeah.
Paul was very open kind of about what he had, because he liked to be able to share it with people in person. Obviously, he didn't know how to share it with the internet and the world, but there's a few guys that have, similar collections to Paul that it's just sitting there. They don't like to talk about it. And I talked to one of the club members, said, "Oh, look at that Audrain motor." And he goes, "Got a couple of those." Yeah. Quietly, I said, "Okay, interesting. I didn't know that was in your shop.
Yeah,
what else you got in there?"
Yeah, right.
The last time I was in there, I was 9, and he said, "All right." When I walked in, he said, "Hit the delete button. You didn't see anything."
Oh my gosh,
that's crazy.
So do you kind of? It's hard to pry, information, stories from these guys, but do some of them kind of want to talk? Are there important figures where you kind of
have
try to push the line?
So
and
Paul's one of those people. It takes a little bit to warm up to.
Yeah.
But he and I drove down here for that opening night exhibit of the Hot Rod Show. So 2 hours down, 2 hours back in the car, and he opened up. I learned a lot of what I know today.
Did you drive or did he drive?
I drove.
No,
nighttime.
Well, I was wondering, because when you're driving, you're in a different state of mind as when you're just sitting there. So he's sitting there like, okay, I'm sitting here.
He was sitting
I'm
there
gonna tell stories.
just rifling off different stories, and he had some stories about Jay. It was funny. He
said to me, I bet it'll be the same thing. I'll cut you off, but he said something like, Jay moved out to LA to be a comedian, and we thought he'd be back in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And it was like, we kind of saved his job for him for a couple weeks, and he didn't come back.
Yep. He said the same thing, but he paused and he goes, "Damn, as a matter of fact, he never did come back."
Yeah. He kind of did the same thing with us, and it was like, you know what? I think he's still out there, type of attitude.
No, he was saying that Jay would be late coming back from some sales call because he would see a wedding on the side of the road, and he'd pull in and say a few lines and then leave.
Yeah.
Got to start your career somewhere.
Yeah, and it's funny because some of the stuff we've heard about him in that era, it's like he's exactly the same person.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were very fortunate. We just spent a week at Jay's garage last month, and obviously the cars are impressive, but to see all of the memorabilia and the stories and, fan mail and photos of him at the 1976 blah, blah, blah charity motorcycle ride. I mean, that place is just, there's so many layers to it.
And that's what it's about, is the history. Like, the cars are great and all, but when you get to hear the stories and see pictures and stuff like that, it just makes it full circle, kind of makes you feel like you lived in that era a little bit.
100%. And his place is not like, you hear a lot about the garage, and it's really
the
cool.
Basement.
Yeah. But it's really cool because it's almost like Paul's, in which he has stuff generally organized in sections, but it's not like, like he goes to a swap meet and he's like, "Oh, I love that photo, I'm gonna put it up." It's like, it's all stuff either directly relating to cars or things that he's gotten, or pictures he's taken with the car, or things people have sent him. So it's really not just, I'm gonna fill the walls. It's like, this is all stuff that we've accumulated.
Curated,
yeah, and it's really cool because a lot of, like Antonio said, some of the stuff's been in the same spot on the wall for 35 years. Yeah. And he knows all about it. He tells stories all the time, and he loves, like you and all of us, just telling stories and sharing this stuff.
Well, it's kind of like, you obviously that's in LA, but you relate it to here. It's like if you go to like Jeff Goldstein's and you walk into the Piston Palace, and the first time I walked, you could remember this. I was supposed to pick up artwork for the GM show that we had.
Yeah, and I call Antonio and I'm like, "Dude, where have you been? It's been 3 hours." He's like, "We're not done walking around yet." You've been there, right? You've been.
I stopped in there before, yeah.
I've been in there. It's not.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah,
so overwhelming.
Yeah,
but in the best way possible.
You walk in, and it's not a massive facility, but it's just the amount of history is absolutely overwhelming. Every inch of the walls are filled. He's got these vintage neon signs that he's acquired. He's got this makeshift, like almost General Motors Chevrolet dealer that he's created.
The little diner and everything.
Yeah, it's just, and Jeff himself is an absolute A1 historian, and he feels almost like he has to show you everything. And it's like, first time I went in, I was like, my brain is so mush right
I didn't
now.
block off 6 hours for today.
Oh my God. And it was like, I had to go back again and really immerse myself for like 2 or 3 hours to really start, digesting this information. It's just, it's an incredible resource that's not really, very well known about because he wants to keep it down low. And it's really cool that, for us, I'm sure if anyone was interested in going, you could connect with us, anyone here in the audience, and we could point you in the right direction. But absolutely amazing resource.
Hot rods in there too.
Yeah, and we did, we put together a General Motors show in 2019 with a number of concept cars from General Motors, which they were kind enough to lend us for a few months, which was nuts. And when you're doing that research, they basically gave us these PDFs that show everything in General Motors digital library that they would basically scan for us. They had an archivist and they would scan for us. A lot of the stuff in their library under location, it said Piston Palace, Warwick, Rhode Island, which is very cool. Interesting because they don't know how he got the stuff, and I don't think he knows the whole route of how it got there. He definitely knows, but it's amazing that it's that official, and so cool. Few people are kind of aware of that resource so close to here.
Yeah,
and he was really instrumental in putting together the Hot Rod Show too, and kind of took me under his wing and said, this is the direction you have to mentally go.
He's so smart.
It's nuts.
It's crazy.
And he, like Brian, is able to, in an encyclopedic way, you ask him a question, and he's like, yep, this is how it went, and this is what the deal was. And it was amazing to have you two guys as a resource. And
that was a fun event.
Oh yeah, it was nuts. And we're glad you're still around and driving all the way down here. Even though you didn't take a hot rod tonight, we're not gonna give you too much shit, but there are thunderstorms outside.
Yeah,
and the wipers aren't
nice
good. I'll make I'll make the excuses for you. It's all right. We understand. We get it. But Brian, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for coming down. It's good to see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Hope to see you soon.
Of course.
Let's plan to do a hot rod at the gathering again.
Don't have to twist my arm.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
1 or 2 or 6 or whatever we want to do.
We can make it work.
Yeah, we'll make it happen. It was fun last year.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right.
Awesome.
Well, thanks, man.
Thanks
everyone. Appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.